Thank you all for joining us. Please enjoy the event.
Welcome to today's webinar, Can Artificial Intelligence Improve America's Unemployment Insurance Safety Net? I'm Andrew Stetner, our Director of Economy and Jobs. We are grateful and excited for all who've joined us for this webinar. Thanks especially to the JP Morgan Chase Foundation for its support of this webinar and a follow-up issue brief that will be shared based on this event. For accessibility purposes, we have a live CART and ASL interpretation for today's event. Before we get started, I'd like to add a few housekeeping notes. Please note that this event is being recorded and live streamed. If you want to rewatch or share the video, just visit tcf.org/events. And if you'd like to submit a question for our panelists, please do so using the comment feature. You get to comment by having YouTube open in your browser and then commenting on the video you would like any other YouTube video, like your favorite cat video. If you're having trouble using the comment feature to ask a question, no problem. Just shoot a note to events@tcf.org with your question, and we'll get to as many as we can today. Also, use that email for any technical questions that come up around the webinar. So I just want to give a little bit of an overview of why it was so important for us to have this discussion today. What we saw at the U.S. Department of Labor, where I serve as Director of UI Modernization through January of this year, and in all of our conversation with states, is the real rapid experimentation and deployment of AI tools in state UI programs. It can be difficult to separate fact from fiction when discussing a new cutting edge technology like AI. We don't yet have driverless trucks crowding our freeways or robot built pizzas replacing Little Caesars. But I can say that AI's time has come for state UI programs. First, the pandemic served as a kind of petri dish for early experimentation with new technologies like AI to deal with the unprecedented workload. Now, states are pressed with a steep decline in resources for staff and are looking for ways to explain complicated laws to workers and employers, bringing AI into chat windows and into fact finding. To borrow an analogy that I heard at last week's Code for America Summit, we can think of AI as a power tool that states can use to increase the productivity and accuracy of state employees. The same way a power screwdriver can increase the productivity but not replace a construction worker. States are rolling out AI to support tasks like adjudication and appeals. But like any tool, and like anyone who has done an AI powered Google search, AI systems can get it wrong. As states are deploying these tools, they need to find new ways to monitor their technology, their staff usage of the technology, and to test AI tools before and after deployment. This is opening up a brave new world for managers, staff, and the public. And I can't think of a better panel of experts who have worked in a variety of roles in the federal government, state government, and in nonprofits to peer into that future with us. With that, I'll turn it over to our moderator and my frequent collaborator, Michelle Evermore, who's now a senior fellow at the National Academy of Social Insurance and, like me, a veteran of the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of UI Modernization. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you. I'm here to welcome our panelists. Michael Burke, Unemployment Insurance Compensation Bureau Director at the New Hampshire Department of Employment Security. Julia Dale, Chief Executive Officer, Sevilla, and also with experience leading the Michigan Unemployment Insurance Agency. Amy Perez, Policy Fellow at the Stanford University Reg Lab, and also former staff at the Colorado Unemployment Insurance Agency, and lead on some of our modernization work at U.S. Department of Labor when it comes to timeliness. And finally, Nikki Zeichner, who is the former Technology Modernization Advisor at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and also worked with Andy and I at the U.S. Department of Labor in the Office of Unemployment Insurance Modernization. So I see people coming online. Great. So I wanted to start out with you, Michael. What AI use cases have you explored in New Hampshire, and why do you see AI as a powerful tool for the UI program going forward?
So we currently have 8 different use cases in some stage of development in New Hampshire. Um, we they range everywhere from assistance to help provide information and communicate our programs to our customers, to our claimants, to performance enhancing applications such as we're building a robotic process automation uh, program to compile appeal records for appeals, and our adjudication assistant to gather better fact finding up front to get better information at the start of a claim so that we'll be able to move them along a little bit more quickly. And I think it's what I see is just an incredible opportunity to improve some efficiencies. When we talk about the unemployment system, we're looking at a system that has received very little funding for decades. So all of our systems are extremely antiquated. I think at the start of the pandemic, I can remember watching a news broadcast where they were in an unemployment office and had a phone with a dial on it. And my kids didn't even know what that was. But I mean, realistically, that's some of the technology that we're struggling with. So this new technology is just welcome in our industry. We there's so many areas that we can utilize this to seek some improvements in the way we operate our business.
Great, thanks. My next question I'm asking Amy, what are some good processes for identifying and prioritizing processes to be automated? And then how do we think about evaluating success and failure?
Great questions. Thanks, Michelle. So in terms of identifying processes that should be automated, you first want to ask what are the issues rather than what should we do with this tool? You know, everything can look like a nail when you have a hammer like AI. But you want to identify what your pain points are in your existing processes and then where the UI system struggles when there's an influx of claims, and then see if there are tools that can match those pain points. It's also important to consider, kind of speaking to Andy's points earlier, about how automation can add value to the process. And it doesn't take away from human judgment and decision making, but rather enhances the process. So, for example, if you have an AI adjudication tool that provides a full chronological timeline of what happened based on the facts of the claim, areas of potential conflicts, provides the relevant law, explains why it referenced that law, and has clickable access to the specific case documents, is extremely helpful for an adjudicator to do their job. And there's also automation. We talk about AI. There's a gamut of here, and Michael spoke about robotic process automation. This is a really great tool for repetitive rote processes and AI and machine learning models can be really effective for those bigger tasks of digesting a lot of documents or many rework loops such as fact finding. So one of the things I'll say in this space is that if states are uncomfortable exploring, you can actually start using AI with less complex tools, such as robotic process automation to automate those non-discretionary tasks. Or you can look at internal facing use cases, such as training assistant tools, which use AI as well. And then when we talk about evaluating success and failure, I cannot stress enough how much risk evaluation is a key component. So absent DOL guidance in this space, states really have to establish a baseline to measure against to determine what is success and what is failure. And you also have to establish a comfort level of risk and consider the stakes involved. So if the stakes are that a person doesn't get benefits, that should require a higher standard of accuracy versus a situation that's lower stakes, where a person might not get an ideal job match or a scheduled appointment time. The other thing is you have to consider if you're comparing apples to apples. So, for example, you may have a 90% accuracy rate with your call center staff, but you can only serve 500 people. So, you adopt a chatbot, and that can serve 50,000 people a day. The accuracy rate of that chatbot might not be 90%, it might be 80%, but you're serving that many more people. So that's the trade-off. And it's a debate that the states and federal DOL really need to explore and continue to find a balance with. But it really, your data changes with the scalability of AI. And also, the other thing I'll say on evaluation is how important it is to do rigorous real life testing. And I think we'll talk about this a little bit more, but it really matters how it works and interacts with the actual users and actual data. So just because you test it before you launch, you also want to apply that same testing and evaluation post-launch. And it's imperative. It has to be done by the state. You can't just leave it to your vendor. You have to have your state staff, your state experts in concert with that and making sure that they're evaluating. And then one piece on that, states can sometimes forget, I need a way to get that data so that I know what to evaluate. So you want to be able to build in something into your model that tells you what task it's been doing so you can focus your evaluation resources effectively. And doing things like A/B testing can rule out algorithm inversion and ensures you're heading towards success. And then the last thing I'll talk about is just independent verification. And this is using a third-party evaluation to ensure that the AI is operating ethically and responsibly using an evidence-based methodology. And so it's really important to invest in this, especially with such an emerging and changing technology like AI, because in addition to validating the project, it also has the potential benefit of demonstrating to others that the project is successful or what did we learn, and will promote the use of AI more broadly and addressing concerns about AI safety. And so I am a firm believer, this is my opinion, that independent evaluation should be baked into the procurement process, as it often is with modernization projects when we have IV&Vs. And so there is an existing vendor and academic ecosystem around this. And if budget challenges, I recognize that's a big thing right now. If that's a problem that's precluding a state from doing a risk evaluation, there are academic research institutions like the Reg Lab or nonprofits like MRDC that will do this for no charge, just because they want to explore the space and make sure that states are implementing AI responsibly. So thanks so much, Michelle.
Thank you, Amy. That was a very robust response. Nikki, you have such an interesting perspective on the intersection of policy, law, and technology, and with regard to public benefit programs. What do you think state safe AI policies look like in light of changing federal policies? And what lessons can you share about what we're learning from this rapidly changing field?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. I mean, so it's rapidly changing. I saw the list of folks who are here today, and so I just know that there are a lot of folks in the audience who know and are like in the weeds with this, who are doing the work at the state level. So you can correct me afterwards because you're kind of having the firsthand experience through it. But I mean, what I've learned is that policy is always hard to navigate, regardless of what the policy is, because it's written to be flexible for all of the many programs and many teams and many states that it's going to apply to. So I just want to say, I think that you all are always challenged with figuring out how to, make your programs match with the policies that, come down from the federal level. I think now is particularly challenging because we've had big changes. We had this really big push under the Biden administration when he issued the executive order around responsible AI or automation deployment in government. We were rushing to, match up with what Biden had, envisioned for agencies like, DOL related agencies, but all of them, right? And a lot of what his executive order centered was, around harms, algorithmic bias and how to protect all types of individuals from potential harms that could come from automation, from scaling decision making, and all of the things that we talk about a lot. And now when we switched administrations, I wouldn't say that everything's thrown out, but the framing has shifted. I'm sure that a lot of you have seen this, right? The shift has been a little bit less around harms and more around just our country's ability to dominate this marketplace, right? And so that framing shifts a lot. And I wouldn't say that everything is different. A lot of the elements are not that different, but still it does change a lot for you all. And I think that one of the big things that I would think, and again, like you can kind of let us know if you are experiencing this yourself, but I would think it makes it harder to understand what the vision is and like what success looks like, because we had this idea of success being to protect everybody from harms, and we had certain frameworks that addressed that particular issue. And now if it's about dominating the global marketplace, like what is the vision that we're kind of attaching to say that we're successful? I think that creates a new challenge for all of the states. And then another thing I'll say is that I think with the change, also we have fewer people working at the federal level to support states and to be connective tissue. So I think that also produces another challenge because states are really more on their own to set their own visions. I know that there are great organizations. One I work with, Center for Public Sector AI, and they are really trying to do that work to be that connective tissue. But I think that that's a gap that creates more challenges. But so all of that to say what's going on at the state level. Fun fact I pulled when I was prepping for this was I noticed that there's just a ton of work happening. So in 2025 legislative session, 50 states introduced AI related legislation. So just to know, like there's so much, a lot of it is pending. There are states that have already put things, in place, but there's just a ton of movement. There's a ton for everybody to track. But I think that there are certain patterns, and we can look at, if you kind of think about what should I pay attention to, the NIST risk management framework has a few elements that you'll start seeing across many states. And those are around impact assessments, human oversight requirements, notice and appeal processes, monitoring, and so on. There are a few of them. So you'll start to see patterns there. And, we can kind of talk about more specifics, but I feel like there's new movement every day. You read about something new. I think Texas just put something out, right? So, we're all kind of in this together trying to navigate.
Great, thank you. I have to say it's hard not to be intimidated a little bit by the attendee list. So, I want to turn this over to Julia. How can AI either improve or worsen claimant experience? And how do you make sure that the way the AI is asking questions is understandable to claimants and incorporate principles of human-centered design as states incorporate AI?
Michelle, I think that is a really great question, especially when we think about some of the risks that Amy highlighted earlier in her comments. I think one thing is really important to keep in mind is that it should always be humans first and machines second when we're thinking about the work. There is tremendous opportunity when we think about our benefit systems and how AI can enhance them. But first and foremost, when we think about how they are guiding our systems, we want to think about how we're designing them, ensuring that we're designing for dignity for our users. If a system is going to make someone feel unseen, not respected, if they're not going to feel trusted or that they have a voice in a process, then we should be asking questions about whether or not this system is working when we utilize something like AI as we really intend it to do. I think there also needs to be incredible transparency when it comes to understanding how decisions are made when we utilize AI tools. Also, I think more important now than ever is that equity must remain a non-negotiable. Every AI tool must be evaluated for racial, geographic, ability-based, and linguistic impact. That is so important when we think about incorporating AI tools into our benefits work. And doing that early on is something that we can do by incorporating human-centered design use cases when we look at testing AI and how it's incorporated into our systems. While certainly we recognize in a time of limited resources that efficacy matters, so does care and trust in the work that is being done. And I think I feel that firsthand as a former UI director and certainly now at Sevilla. I think the other thing that I really want to highlight here is that it can't just be our state administrators that are impacting and shaping how we use AI technology. We have to utilize our community voices, other stakeholders when it comes to designing and testing and exploring, how those facilities are going to be used. It's so important to bring in those stakeholders to inform, the decisions that are being made by this type of technology. I think certainly there's opportunities for states, especially to partner in the way that has already been highlighted. We know that there are other, organizations out there, whether it's independent, validation and verification through IV&V, whether it's working with organizations like Sevilla to help, generate HCD testing scenarios. We also know that we need to have a framework even before we start, procuring these contracts for these systems to make sure that our AI proposals reflect equity and dignity in them as well. I think really at the beginning, we need to be evaluating how we use these tools.
Great, thank you. That's really a helpful perspective. So I'm going to open up a few questions for the whole panel before we open up questions from the public. And the first thing I want to talk about is, unemployment insurance is a little bit different than other public benefits programs because the Social Security Act has language that has been further explored in guidance over the years about the role of merit staff in decision making. I want to talk a little bit about how does that apply to AI and how can we make sure that the role of merit staff continues to solidly protect both claimants and program integrity?
If I could speak to that for just a minute, because I mean, that plays into exactly what we were talking about as we were designing our adjudication assistant. I don't remember whether it was Nikki who said that we've got to sorry, just lost my train of thought there. I'm going to just step back for a second. With our adjudication assistant, I wanted to make sure there was a human component in every aspect of it. So the way that this adjudication assistant works is claimant comes in and they file a claim for unemployment. If there's a potential issue around their separation from employment, they're directed to the adjudication assistant. The model will just simply ask them, how come you're not working there anymore? And allow the claimant to explain in their own words why they're no longer there. And based upon that claimant's explanation, it will pull from information that we've provided that model to align it to a reason for separation that associates with UI law. And then it will ask relevant questions around that separation. And if, while it's asking those questions, it seems to take it down another path for that separation, it will expand and it will change its questioning to hopefully really come up with the reason why that person isn't working there anymore. When the claimant finishes answering their fact-finding questions, they're presented with a transcript of that conversation, the questions and the answers provided. And we inform them they need to read that and make sure that it's accurate before they click OK and this model can move on. If they disagree with it, they really need to start that process over again. And that process holds through when we reach out to the employer for fact finding. That same presentation will come up. And then when it goes to an adjudicator, we use all of those tools that were mentioned, and I forget who mentioned them earlier, where we're putting a timeline together of the case. We're pointing out discrepancies between the two stories. We're bringing in relevant law. We're presenting potential follow-up questions for an adjudicator to ask. But the ultimate decision on the case remains with that adjudicator. And that's how it will always be in New Hampshire. There are very few instances in which we would look at auto adjudication. We actually do use auto adjudication now, not AI related, but with work search issues. And basically it is, the only time we use that is when there can be no other outcome. The person didn't look for work this week. We say, hey, you realize you didn't look for work this week. It's a condition of your eligibility. And they say, yep, I understand. I didn't look for work. I know it's going to affect my benefits. And then we can auto adjudicate. But whenever there's a question or whenever there's a decision where you have to look at the facts, it's always going to be merit staff. I wouldn't rely on AI to do that.
Great. Anybody else want to weigh in on that question?
I think Michael covered it.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, the rules are still the rules. So
yeah.
One thing I do want to say, something I've been thinking about regarding just the human in the loop issue, which merit staffing is like an example of that. When do we need to have humans decide things. I think also, like, as people, because I know there are a lot of folks at the state level here thinking about navigating the marketplace, I think that it's a design issue too. Like when we look at the tools that are being marketed to us, or to you all, because I don't have the budget to buy these big systems right now. But like when you're buying things, like I don't know how often the companies are thinking about, like, how do we design something so that it enables somebody to engage in deep thinking work and some type of like discretionary task rather than like focusing on efficiency and eliminating the work altogether. I think that that is like just something I want like to say, because I know you all interact with folks who are trying to sell products. And I think that's an interesting thing to think about, that part of it is you thinking about how do I create the processes that include people in the decision making. But I think part of it also sits with the companies that are developing the tools that we use.
Oh, that's a really important point. Thanks. So I want to move on to thinking about, presumably the use of AI is a continually improving process. There have to be human hands on the wheel to as AI learns and iterates. How do you provide a good feedback loop to make sure that you essentially keep the process on the rails?
I'm going to respond to that again as well, because that was really important as we were building this model, is that I want to make sure that we can be constantly improving it, but at the same time, when I have a model in a production environment, I don't want it changing. I want to know what's there, and I want to know that it's stable. So with the adjudication assistant, when we put that model into production, it will not grow, it will not change, it will remain. However, in our test and development environments, we do have essentially like a Netflix, a thumbs up, a thumbs down. And so what we do is I have a team, we've pulled together an AI team that is going to work on reviewing all of our production results in these models. And essentially, on those transcript pages where it asks those questions, there's a thumbs up, thumbs down. Thumbs up, yes, ask more questions like this. This is relevant. Thumbs down, do not ask this. And then, of course, we also have access to the model's prompting. If it did something that was really, it really should not do, we can prohibit it from doing that with prompting. For instance, when we were testing the model and it started asking questions that might delve a little bit too much into somebody's medical history, we put a prompt in to prevent it from going down that road at all. So in general, the thumbs up, thumbs down will give you better results. But if you find something that really needs to be, you want to put the brakes on it immediately, you can do that through prompting. And so, but we have a team that does these regular reviews of these programs to ensure that it's meeting what it set out to do.
Michelle, I'd like to just piggyback a bit off of Michael's comment too. I think what's really important as well is to take a couple steps back and think about those teams, whether it's on the vendor side or whether it's the team you have internally, and thinking about who are those voices that have the influence and the opportunity to inform those learnings, and making sure that you have a diversity of voices and experience that are informing those learnings to make sure that you're not having some unintended bias that is imprinting itself on those systems.
And I'll just piggyback on that. I don't know if you can hear me. I'm having issues with my mute, but okay, good. Those listening sessions are so important in terms of, how do the staff feel about this? Does it feel like it's a value add? And then also, is your QA sampling, I think being really transparent about here's how many cases we're sampling, here's how we came to that statistically relevant number. Here's why we think that we're doing a really good job of evaluating this, and it's at our risk level that we're acceptable, and the success is where we need it to be before we put it into production. So having all of that being very transparent to your staff as well will help with that change management piece in terms of adopting a new technology. But that having that feedback session and those listening, I can't stress how important that is in terms of they're your staff. They know what's working, what's not, and how important it is to bring them alongside and not just introduce it to them and they have no idea why we're doing this, how we're doing this, and how do we even know this works. So all really great points made, and just wanted to iterate. Thanks.
I would just, Amy, I couldn't agree more. I think my experience I've seen throughout government has been that sometimes we think we're communicating enough and often we aren't, especially when it comes to the deployment of new systems. And so just really leaning into that prioritizing inclusion and accessibility and continuous feedback throughout the life cycle of the deployment. Like if you think you're doing enough, do 20% more than what it is you're doing.
I just want to add two more things that you all made me think of, which was one, for folks who have been involved in like all of the civic tech, digital services work, you hear a lot about human-centered design and agile methods. And, I think that like it's super important now because particularly in this context, we do need to adopt more kind of quick, you know, quick iterations of work, and we need to kind of like have those teams that are able to be all hands on deck and testing and like continuously, right? So the issues that we have always had with technology modernization that we talk about all the time, like I think that right now it is kind of essential, right? That we kind of prioritize those practices that we talk about all the time, um, but like now it's very important. And then I also just wanted to mention, Julia, you made me just think that I read recently about the federal CIO changing the way in which we like focus on having different feedback into like what, how we develop technologies that we use in the government, right? That we're not, I can't remember, like I'm not like very eloquent about it, but that we're focusing on hearing feedback from companies that are building and shipping technology rather than all of the other voices. And so I think that's like an important shift also because, typically we would have so many people weighing in on the vision of policy, right? So that's something I think worth noting. And then like also for states to think about that, like that's something that in addition to everything else that you have on your plates, like that might also be something that you're kind of shaping on your own, whatever, vision you have for the work that you deliver.
Great, thanks for that. A great conversation. I want to dig a little bit deeper on this question because we could be on the brink of a recession. And so I want to kind of explore the implications of AI there, where an anomaly now might be affecting 5 or 10 claims a week. If claims numbers increase dramatically, that same anomaly could affect 500 or 1,000 claims a week. So how are we thinking about scaling? And I mean, I think it's probably good that we're deploying new things at this period of extraordinarily low unemployment. But as that employment rate rises and as there's more initial claims, how do we think about it?
I think one of the things that stands out to me that, we saw during the pandemic in response to the rapid rise in claims was the training of staff, right? And the new policies. And so when you think about implementing or rolling out these new tools or systems utilizing AI, is how do we train and prepare staff to engage and intervene in some of these decision points or when they're seeing anomalies, right? I think there is a necessity to really think about how we prepare staff to engage with these systems and these tools as we utilize them more and more. And I'm not sure, Michael, if that's something you could speak to a little bit more. I've certainly, it's at the forefront of my mind, though, is how we prepare our teams, across the country for that
Well, I
event.
mean, yeah, sure. I mean, if we just thinking about the resources that are available to adjudicators, like in this adjudication tool, when I'm bringing on new staff, I mean, one of the greatest challenges is where do I find the information? We have law books, we have Supreme Court decisions, we have policies, we have rules, we have UIPLs. This information is everywhere, guidebooks. So when an adjudicator, especially a newer adjudicator, is trying to learn this process, sometimes just accessing that material can be a challenge all on its own. So here I'm presenting all of the relevant material right at their fingertips. So just for training alone, the benefits of something like this program are fantastic. So when you're talking about the rapid increase in claims, I mean, that's part of what drove, a tool like the adjudication assistant, is to get some of that better information up front. When we think about the start of the pandemic, and we were hit with tens of thousands of claims in the first couple of weeks, when it actually comes time when we can look at addressing some of those issues, and then what we found was we didn't have any information. And then, so how do you reach out to all of these folks in the midst of a pandemic to grab that information? So, we're forced to make decisions with the best information we have so that we can get the benefits out as quickly as possible. So improving that information from the start of the claim is going to make a tremendous difference in how we move forward in the future, and reduce dramatically improper payments. So.
I'll just add to that as well. In terms of the quality assurance, it's so difficult when you have a ramp up in claim volume to keep staff on target with their task. So, for example, if you've identified your AI team, Michael, or your QA team, your team leads that are monitoring the models that you've implemented, you can't take those staff off and put them on answering calls. As much as you want to, and as much as you feel the pressure to, it's imperative that you maintain that QA piece and that ongoing monitoring. And also, as I spoke about this earlier, related to ensuring that you have a method and a tool to get the data. Like, let's say, for example, from your chatbot, what are the types of questions is the chatbot answering? And looking at kind of your sample sets of these are the different types of questions that it's answering. That question is probably a red flag. We should dive into that more. And that's where I need my QA team to look into that and say, okay, is the model working as intended? But my biggest concern in a recession is that these staff are going to be pulled to do other things. And that's the last thing that should happen, is because if, like, to your point, Michelle, if it happens to explode and you all of a sudden are issuing the same answer that's incorrect to thousands of people, you have so much rework, it's not worth it. So it really is imperative to keep those staff in those positions and even bulk up. And there's been I've heard some states talk about concerns around sampling. And how do we know? Because we have so many more cases. If you're sticking to a good sample size, you should identify those errors. So it's not so much that you need to increase your sample size by the exact amount of increase in cases. You can come back to a statistically valid sample size. And there's a math that has been proven that can do that. So you don't have to be as concerned, because it will identify those errors. But you have to have the staff that can do those checks. So if you don't do those checks, then you're kind of out of luck in terms of making sure the systems are working as intended. And also, when we all saw all the new guidance, and it was changing all the time. So that's another thing when we consider not only training staff, but training the models and making sure that it's up to date with the new guidance, and it understands how the state is interpreting that guidance, or how the federal DOL has interpreted that. So those are a couple of key pieces I would just add to that.
I would just chime in, Michelle. I think one of the things that I don't know that we've explored as much is how AI can be used to provide helpful insights as we see upticks, as we see trends, not as a tool for surveillance, but to be able to really provide insight into what our workers are experiencing, what our employers are experiencing across the country, and to really allow state agencies to plan then in response to seeing various trends or insights. I think the other thing that we're probably, just on the cusp of, stepping into wholeheartedly is thinking about smart eligibility across benefit systems and what that could look like, thinking about cross-enrollment opportunities, and how, as we see changes or we see employment impacted, how that potentially can impact other benefits and really create more of an ease of use in processes, rather than having, our workers and our customers, in these systems having to go into one system after another. If we can really lean into some smart eligibility tools, I think there's tremendous opportunity there.
That is such a good point, and that good labor market information can really help workers get back to a good job quicker. So I would like to open the questioning up to the public, but while we're waiting for questions to come in from them, I'm going to ask one more quick, well, this is not a quick question. Um, First, how can AI specifically be used to detect and prevent fraud? And then what policies should be in place to ensure that that fraud flagging doesn't prevent claimants from getting benefits when due, or be notified of a false fraud flag that could be concerning to receive?
I can speak to that a little bit because we actually built our own in-house fraud program in 2017. And it was great in a normal environment. But when the pandemic hit, some of the markers that we put in as potential indicators for fraud blew up. For instance, too many claims filed from the same IP address. Well, when you had whole families filing from the same household, it would set off a fraud indicator. So, we were flooded with tens of thousands of fraud flags. I will say that, and I'm not sure how other states handle it, but in New Hampshire, just because a claim is flagged for fraud doesn't mean we stop payment. Only in those clear cases where we know that it's not the individual, for instance, ID theft, and we've identified it up front when we stop payment. Other than that, it becomes a priority in investigation. So how do we determine which of those we're going to prioritize? So when one of the grants that I had applied for was to look at using AI to look at our current fraud program, bring in some additional cross matches that have been added since we designed that fraud program, and then also be able to run all of our claims history going back to 2009 when we first went live with our benefit payment system, and run all of that through these AI models to try to pick up on not only trends or potential markers that we might have missed in the past in identifying fraud claims, but also potentially identifying trends for the future and maybe be predictive in what may happen with fraud going forward. But the primary goal of this was to look at all of that information and give us better scoring up front so that we could identify those claims that would be at highest risk for fraud, even though they may have thrown off multiple markers like in a pandemic situation. So how do we decide which ones we're going to look at first? So that's how we're using the AI model for fraud here.
Does anybody else want to weigh in on the fraud question?
So just going off of what AI is, it's big data management. So the ability, I mean, I remember when I was in Colorado during the pandemic and we were looking at fraud claims, and it was our staff that identified, this same person. There's a barber is the same occupation on 76 claims, or Coco is the same password on all of these claims, but being able to identify those commonalities across many, many claims is a ripe tool for AI. And that's what a lot of these fraud analytics programs are based off of. And so just to kind of like level set that. But also one of the interesting things that I've also seen is kind of the dark web, and because the fraudsters will talk about this, on the dark web. And so being able to use AI to scrape what conversations are being had and identify, oh, this is the latest trend. This is what they're trying to use to jam the system and stuff like that. So it can be used a multitude of different ways. I think the products are constantly changing and evolving, so it just needs to be a constant conversation with those vendors, and or if you have the capability within your own IT department to build that out, having those conversations with other states to see what they're seeing as well. And NASWA is a great partner in the space. So it just trying to kind of put all of this together. And I think everyone's a little scared to say, here's what we're going to do, because a fraudster might be listening and we don't want to tell them exactly what we're doing. So there's some tidbits in there. So definitely having some offline conversations in exploring that. But big data management, that's the beauty. That's the gift of AI that we've never had before. So we should really be leveraging it for fraud.
I'm also curious. I don't mean to put you on the spot, Michael, but I'm going to. And just asking quickly, when I was at DOL with folks, it wasn't that long ago, right? It was maybe like a few years ago.
Yeah.
And the idea of automating fraud detection was like super high risk. And, we were like, that's a no-go. And a lot has changed over the past 2 years or so. And so, and it seems like we're seeing great opportunities to use AI to do some of that work for us. Like, I'm curious about what that experience has been like for you, or if you have any insights around that in particular, anything to say about that?
Well, I think we were one of the first to actually build our own in-house fraud detection program back in 2017. And I will say, despite some of the issues that we had with it, with it overproducing alerts or issues for us, we actually had less than $500,000 go out in identity theft during the pandemic. And I know that sounds like a lot of money, but I think if you look comparatively, we did a fantastic job, especially for a fraud that was relatively unknown to us at the time. So I I think it was when we started to see that explosion of fraud at the start of the pandemic, and then we started to see some backing from Congress and the administration to really start investigating and looking into fraud. Certainly, it brought forth a lot more opportunities for us to start to address it, and even bringing the conversations up, states sharing best practices. We were able to at least start to communicate more about fraud and how we can prevent it. So there has been a change as a result of the pandemic. Unfortunately, it came at a great cost.
I have a question here that was submitted from an audience member about OpenAI. And this is a really good question, I think, that gets to like maybe how we understand unemployment insurance information. It's always been my experience that state agencies go to incredible lengths to protect their claimants' data securely. And so, like, this isn't going to be OpenAI coming in and sucking information out of the state agency to feed its model. I'm right about that, correct? And can we talk about how that what we're talking about when we're talking about AI?
Yeah, I can start with that.
Yep.
What I'm seeing from a lot of the vendors in the space is they're actually it's a closed model. So it's not it's ChatGPT. It is building its own model based on the state's regs, the policies, UPLs, et cetera. It's feeding all of that into a customized model for the state based on what the state says. This is what's relevant for us to do our job. And that is a closed model. It is not something that is being sent back to, OpenAI or anything like that. Now, if your staff are actively using ChatGPT during their job, that might be something you might want to take a look at because they might be looking at, I don't have an AI tool, so I'm going to use ChatGPT to do my work. That might be something you want to look at with your staff. Sorry if I called out any staff that are doing that right now, but then you are actually sharing your information, potential claimant information with an entity like OpenAI. But the way that these models work by and large is a closed system. It's contained within the environment. And usually it's built, on-prem. Sometimes it's done, behind the firewall is basically what I'm trying to say. And so there's just different options here to ensure that security, but it is not sharing it directly out to the world. And that is something that states have been really good about and vendors are being really good about in making sure that it's contained and it's not publicly disseminated. So they're protecting that information.
Well, I can say that both ways. Not only are we not sharing information out into the world, but we're also giving the model what information we want for it to be able to present. So for example, when we were training the model for the resources for the adjudication assistant, we had originally pointed that model to our entire law book, and which was great. It's a great resource. But when it came to bringing up the relevant law for the adjudicator on that screen, it would bring up relevant laws, but then it would bring up laws that maybe had some connection, but were not really relevant for adjudication. So essentially what we did is we pulled the law book out, and then we just put in the statutes that were relevant to adjudication. So that I guess my point in that is we're not reaching out to the World Wide Web for the resources that are being provided to our adjudicator. Our adjudicators are only getting access to the resources we provided to the model. And same thing when we were coming up with the questions for the model, we actually fed it the questions, so it would get a sense of the types of questions and how to ask them. So it wasn't deriving them on their own, on its own from from some other source. And then the way our information is contained, we essentially have a sandbox in a cloud environment, and everything in there belongs to the state of New Hampshire. Nobody outside has access, not even the vendor can access that space. It is completely contained. And even with that, I took the extra precaution, because the adjudication assistant was the first AI product that we developed, to not share any PII with that model, except for what was absolutely necessary to do the job. So in this case, since we're just asking about why they're no longer working there, the only information I needed to share with the model was the employer name and the last date of employment. Other than that, we communicate with the model through an ID number that's associated to that claimant. So we still, even though those other protections are there, we're still taking some extra protections in only sharing the information that's necessary for the model to be successful.
Great. And so we're getting near the end. I'm going to ask a speed round question of everybody in the panel. Ultimately, what's your advice to policymakers looking to right-size AI in UI benefit delivery?
I'm afraid to say no regulation, but I certainly, in this time, I think we do need some freedom to explore with this new technology. I don't want it to be overregulated. At the same time, we need to understand the potential power of this new technology as well. And there have to be, some ways to rein it in. I know, some of the processes I took, we don't have any real guidance in New Hampshire other than some general guidance on the use of AI. So some of the things that I took a responsibility on is, first, I want to make sure that anybody who's engaging with AI with the state of New Hampshire is aware that they're engaging with AI. I tell them up front before they start. I tell them on every page they go through that they're engaging with AI. I think that's important. I want to make sure that if we're gathering information from AI, that it's been approved by the person that's provided it. I want to make sure that it's accurate and they understand it. And then I want to make sure that when we're reviewing that AI information, we have a way to cross-check. If I'm reading a summary, an AI summary, I want to be able to click in that summary and go back and show me the transcript where it said this, so that we can kind of cross-check a lot of that information. So, I think, we were building in those own protections on our side, but I'd be afraid to have it be too overregulated that we're confined and we can't make use of the tools.
Michelle, I would say, I think the pandemic laid out very clearly for us, especially in the realm of unemployment insurance, the impact of disinvestment. And I think that we have an opportunity, our state leaders and their stakeholders and organizations have an opportunity to really reimagine with AI how government can work and how it should work. And so my caution would be that, yes, we have to educate these iterations of these AI tools, right? We have to feed them, but let's not replicate the bad decisions or the bad judgments that maybe exist in our current system. Let's not replicate the barriers or the systemic biases that exist. And let's really put the effort into reimagining how government could work. And I would suggest should work for those that it was set up to serve.
Great points. I'll add to that. I do think that risk evaluation is a must, and it should be something baked into policy in terms of ensuring that it's working as intended and transparency around what exactly is being measured, how it's being measured, what's the baseline, so that we can all learn together and develop a tolerance for risk. Additionally, anyone who knows me knows this. This is not news, but the merit staffing rules do need to be looked at. They are a little bit restrictive in this space if we were to apply them directly with AI, because it does talk about analysis of a claim being done by a merit staff person. There's a lot that AI can do that's very effective and time saving. And so we really need to get into the nitty-gritty details about what that is and what that looks like and what is inherently governmental and what exactly does require critical decision making skills, and make sure that we find a way forward to ensure that the staff are getting the work that's absolutely necessary for them to be getting, so that when we do have these high claim volumes, we are focusing on that and we're letting the automation help us with those easier cases. Michael mentioned work search, but there's simple quits that could be automated. Many states agree on this. There's simple other pay that could be automated. There's a lot of issues that if every single issue has to be touched by a human, even if there's a human in the loop, and even if all this fact finding is great and robust and wonderful, you are still going to have a massive bottleneck. So the fact of the matter is that merit staffing rule, while well intended in the 1930s when it was created, is not really helping us today in almost 100 years later. So we just need to revisit that. It's something I would implore policymakers to really look at, because if that's the case, then states are going to be forced to make a really tough decision when the time comes of which law do I follow and which rule do I follow, and do I follow my governor or do I follow the feds? I don't know, because there's going to be conflicts there because the merit staffing rules do not fit today's world. And that's my opinion. Thank you.
I'm just gonna give my my 3 cents because I have 3 things that I want to say, which is one, as others have said, I think that it's great when policymakers are willing to go along with those who are on the product side and like experiment together. We did that at DOL. We had amazing attorneys who were excited to come along and they learned with us and we all kind of partnered together. I think that that's important. And there's a great opportunity here. And the more that the policy folks understand how the building happens, like the better everything's going to be. So that's one thing. I think that, like to Amy's points, I think that, like, what's the objective? If it is about delivering the best services to the public, like, then we, think about, okay, what are the pieces of regulation that we have in place, does that serve that goal? And like to Amy's point, maybe there are some things in place that are obstacles for us delivering benefits as well as we could given the circumstances that we're in today. So I think that that's an opportunity for folks on the policy end. And then also one more thing is that, policy folks at the state level, you all are busy, but also it looks like you all might be limited in what you can do too, right? Given just the recent word from the administration that states are going to be limited. They're not going to be able to like do as much as they'd like around regulating AI. But I think that one thing that's interesting, and this relates to what Julia was talking about, I think that, part of what's happening now is at the federal level, they're saying, look, we have enough in place that can protect people from biases. We have the Civil Rights Act. We can use existing laws to curb potential harms. I think that one thing that we're seeing is a lot of the ways that people can be harmed are not necessarily related to the classes identified in the Civil Rights Act that were relevant back when the Civil Rights Act was written. So Julia mentioned earlier, we have to think about linguistic issues, right? Well, that's not part of the Civil Rights Act, right? We don't talk about discrimination based on language. We don't talk about discrimination based on what neighborhood you live in, right? But those are the things that happen in these particular circumstances. So I think that's a real opportunity of thinking about like, what are those buckets? Because they might not be the same as the buckets that we thought about when the Civil Rights Act was written.
Those are incredible points. Thank you so much, Nikki. Thank you to the whole panel. And thank you to everyone attending the event. But this was a really robust discussion. As you can see, there are questions where, there are a variety of viewpoints. And so keep in touch with us on this. We will be, developing a brief after this. We've got a lot of questions that people wanted to get to that we didn't quite. So more to come on this. And also a special thank you to the Century Foundation and to the JP Morgan Foundation. And a recording of this will be made available immediately after the event on tcf.org. But thank you so much, panelists.